I'm Christy Bishop, and you're listening to the What Nobody Tells Us podcast. Each week, I'll be exploring a topic that's often stigmatized, misunderstood, or simply left unaddressed. And we're going to be shedding light on the things that nobody tells us, but that everyone should know. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of What Nobody Tells Us. Today, I have Mark Neveau, who is a former San Francisco Bay Area Fire Chief Officer who became later part of the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. Mark is joining me today to talk all about the recovery efforts and the support efforts for the Los Angeles wildfire victims, including those in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena, the Palisades and the Eaton fires, where the majority of the significant damage was done. Now, there's so much misinformation going around the interwebs and just through our communities about what is available, what the role of FEMA is, what people can actually get, what they need to do immediately in the first days and weeks following this disaster, and what are the roles of your local and state versus federal agencies, as well as insurance companies. So I've gathered a lot of questions from friends and family friends who have unfortunately been impacted and have lost everything, as well as people online who are curious about what's going on. And Mark and I had an amazing conversation, and he is a wealth of knowledge around everything related to this disaster. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you have questions, by all means, please reach out, because we can do a follow-up episode, because this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. The recovery efforts within Los Angeles are going to take years, but the purpose of this episode is to give you answers and really critical information to what happens immediately, what people need to do, how they can access those funds, what they need to watch out for, what mistakes you absolutely should not make, how do you avoid falling victim to predatory scams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Mark and I really get into everything, and also really applaud the Los Angeles city as at large, as well as the individual communities, for coming together and providing support in a way that, as a native Angelino, I've honestly never seen. It's truly beautiful to behold in the midst of all of this devastation and grief. So again, enjoy this episode. If you have questions, please reach out. Christy, CHRISTIE, at nobodytellsus.com, or you can go to Christy Bishop, CHRISTIE, BISHOP.com, and get in touch with me there, because we will do a follow-up episode if it's needed, and help support people along the way. So without further ado, please enjoy this really informative episode with Mark Neveau. Hi, Mark. Welcome to What Nobody Tells Us. Thank you so much for joining today.
Good morning, Christy. I'm glad to be here.
This episode is a special episode, as I said in the intro, and I'm so thrilled that my brother Chris introduced us, because as everyone who's listening knows, the Los Angeles area has been, my God, it's still January. When we're taping this, it's still January 31st.
Yeah.
We've gone through it this month with the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire and the Hughes fire and Sunset fire. And today we're talking about FEMA and insurance, and hopefully helping a whole lot of people figure out what they can do as they navigate this really difficult time.
That sounds wonderful. Let's do it.
Perfect. So, I just want to start really quickly with some of your background. It's always better to hear it in someone's own words instead of having me, do the whole description. But can you talk a little bit about your background? You were a fire chief. Now you've worked with FEMA under the Obama administration, but just give us a little bit of your background and expertise.
Sure. I come from the California Fire Service, retired out as a chief officer, battalion chief, managing emergencies across the state. And had a wonderful career, worked with some wonderful people. I've traveled up and down the state dealing with wildfires and, all types of different emergencies. After about 28, 30 years in the fire department, I had an opportunity to go to work for the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as what is known as an FCO. Most people have never heard of that, but it's a Federal Coordinating Officer. So what that means is when a governor in a state runs into a challenge, whether it's terrorism, wildfire, hurricane, flooding, whatever it might be, needs help from the federal government, they request that help from the president. The president is the only person in our government that has the authority to grant what's known as a presidential disaster declaration, which is what City of Los Angeles has right now, and some of the counties are joining to that. And so what we do is we get written orders from the White House. They send us out there, and we work with the governor and their staff, emergency management staff, to figure out what's necessary to respond to and recover from very damaging and devastating events.
Mhm. Thank you. You mentioned FCO, and I think that's like you said, a lot of people don't know what that is. Why is an FCO important, and what are some of the responsibilities?
What happened was after Katrina, the government realized we weren't operating so well. So Congress went into session and came out with some direction for different agencies to make us, the federal government, respond better. And so what they did do was require the head of FEMA to be an emergency manager. The first one that operated under the new regulations was a former fire chief from Miami, David Paulison. And so what he did was he started hiring federal coordinating officers, which are almost like a field general. And so our job is to go out again and work with the governor and staff, but it gives us, the access to every federal agency, every federal department, and the large bank account called the Disaster Relief Fund. So
Mm.
really, we have access to whatever's necessary to get things done.
You mentioned in our earlier chat, we had a quick prep chat for this, as I typically do before recording, that you were part of the 2008 LA fires. How did what you saw during 2008 prepare you for what you're seeing now with the Palisades and the Eaton disasters?
Well, at the time in 2008, that was the largest loss of homes due to wildfire in the city of LA's history.
Hmm.
Certainly, that's being eclipsed by this event. I'm not so sure it prepared me for it. It just gave me some foundation as to what's necessary to recover. And what we're talking about, it's a large, as you know, geographic as well as urban area. And so
Yeah.
that presents challenges that you don't always find typically in more remote areas such as Oregon or Colorado, those areas that suffer from wildfires. This is unique because of the diversity in terms of socioeconomics as well as geographically how far apart these events are. So I
Hmm.
think that's what presents uniqueness. I'm not sure it prepared me for it. I don't think what took place here anybody was really prepared for or ready, if you will.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this particular event, it's not unusual for the state of California when we have red flag season, such
Mm.
as what we saw, red flag conditions, meaning, there's low temperatures, low fuel moisture, high winds are coming through. That prior to these fires breaking out, there were an additional 65 fire engines, 22 hand crews, and a number of aircraft already on standby in
Right.
case something happened.
There is a lot of misinformation around that, which I want to cover before we just jump into FEMA. And as I'm trying to combat as much as I can online, and in California, and Governor Newsom had to put out CaliforniaFireFacts.com to combat misinformation as well. And there were some, just as a fire expert and as fire battalion chief, when you think about the fire hydrants, one of the biggest pieces of criticism was that the hydrants went dry and that the reservoirs were empty and they didn't have enough water, and what happened with California's water, and the reservoirs were full. And from my understanding is that the pressure on the system was unprecedented, and we've never experienced any sort of event where all of the hydrants at one time were pulling all of the waters, and the backup fills actually just couldn't fill it up quick enough. So do you have any perspective there, or any insight into what actually happened?
No, I think anytime you get a disaster of this portion, you're going to find a number of contributing factors. It's not just simply a fire started and burned homes. You're going to find things such as this that transpired. And, when you have a tank that's got millions of gallons of water on the top of the ridge that could provide assistance to that area, there's no question that's going to have an impact on the firefighters. And the reason for that is you think about they're trying to fight fire with a fire engine that's only got 1,000 gallons of water in it. Without
Mhm.
that fire hydrant, that water will run dry in probably 5 or 10 minutes. And so then they have to shuttle water back and forth. So compounding that the reservoirs were empty was also in some cases the fire hydrants were missing. People had actually stolen them. So that presented some of the problems too. With all that said, what it does is it just adds one more challenge and it affects the operation. Now, having that reservoir dry and those hydrants not working doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, if there was water and the tanks were full, none of this would have happened. That's not the case.
Mhm.
It did hamper things in the operation, but because of the winds and the conditions,
Yeah.
that was going to overwhelm the resources that were there anyways.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it was like a fire hurricane. I mean,
Well
100
said.
mile an hour winds with fire.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't. Even at our house in West LA, it was the wind was strong enough to try to open up our front door as it was double locked. Like
Wow.
that's yeah, it was completely insane.
What's interesting about that is of recent, because the fires in California, wildfires, have been much more frequent and
Hmm.
larger. What you're seeing as a tactic from wildfire firefighters, the chiefs operating these, is that, and it wasn't this way, towards the beginning of my career, but as a tool to fight the fire, they're going first to evacuation. I mean,
Hmm.
they're going to still deploy resources, triage homes, try and save them. But as an operational tactic, they're saying, let's get people out of the way right away.
Yeah,
And the distance in which they're using used to be maybe a half a mile, depending upon the size of the fire. Now we're seeing fires so large, so hot, travel so
yeah,
fast that those evacuation zones are 1 mile, 2 mile, 5 miles away,
yeah.
which that had not taken place prior to whatever has changed in California's environment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, here the evacuation alerts went out quite early. I think the fire started around 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and they went out really early. We got them. We got the notifications, and obviously we had. I think everyone in this city of Los Angeles has downloaded the app Watch Duty, which is
Right.
like real time. Wind trends, fire trends, updates on evacuation zones and evacuation warning zones. But it was really interesting to see how far away, to your point, the evacuation zones and warning zones were. Just get ready. And obviously, then the media jumped on all of that with what do you need to prepare and as multiple fires started to break out throughout the city of Los Angeles, there was just this element of panic on that Tuesday and Wednesday, which was insane. You mentioned that some of the fire hydrants had been stolen. I hadn't heard that. Is that something that you're hearing from people on the ground here?
Correct. There were areas that did take place, and some of it, they surmise it was for scrap metal.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's something that's not being reported. Thank you for sharing that. So let's demystify FEMA for people. The
Sure.
it's interesting. So I mentioned to you the FEMA disaster relief zone is like very close to our home,
Mm.
and it's wild to drive by it all the time and just see all of the people in there and the disaster relief trucks, the FEMA trucks. It feels surreal in a way. It's something that I've only ever seen on TV. Certainly
Yeah.
not in our backyard.
Yeah.
So for full disclosure, we have had friends who have lost everything in the
Mm.
Palisades fire. We have friends whose homes are still standing and former colleagues in Altadena, but they are inaccessible and everything is ruined due to smoke damage and exposure.
Mm.
So when they're thinking about, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes from what I've heard. They're completely overwhelmed, completely grief stricken, trying to get their head around any of this. And if they have kids, and the school's burned down, like they have nowhere to
Yeah.
live. They do not have a school. They do not have anything except what they are able to take out of the home in a rush to evacuate, which in some cases is quite literally the clothes on their back, their
Yeah.
phone, and their car keys.
Yeah.
That's it. In other cases, as like our friends whose dad house had burned down in the Altadena fire, he got out three paintings, his late
Oh.
wife's favorite sculpture that she made, and his clothes. Like
Oh.
literally, that's it. So when people hear about FEMA, most recently you heard about North Carolina, and then FEMA's on the ground, right? The president's given the order, and FEMA shows up. So what does that actually mean?
What that does is once the disaster declaration is declared, that opens up a funding stream, and that means resources are moving. Now, in a lot of cases, if it's a noticed event, hurricane, we knew to some degree that we had red flag season conditions coming to LA. So what FEMA does is they not only assist in pre-deploying fire engines, things like that. What they do is they declare what's known as FMAG, Fire Management Assistance Grant, and
Mm,
that comes within hours of the fire. And the idea behind that is to let the incident commanders know that the federal government has their back in terms of funding. And so if you need to call large aircraft, multiple aircraft, whatever you need, don't hesitate to do that because of the cost involved.
mm,
And so they're getting funding right off. FEMA will also they'll help with Emergency Operations Center. They have teams that travel across the country and they're deployed to different emergency operations center as liaisons with the state and local officials that are managing things. So there's a connection to the federal government. They're also providing intelligence information in terms of what's flying above them, whether it be drone, aircraft, or satellite, and they
mm.
feed that information back down to incident commanders to help them. As these incidents progress and people need to get assistance on a temporary basis, what happens is FEMA will start registering people right away, meaning
Mm.
whether by your phone, whether by computer, whatever tool that you have available, you can register and tell them, hey, I've lost everything. This is my address, etc. What they will do is then make sure you fit within the zip code and it's a legitimate request, and that's done within minutes. Within 24 to 48 hours in your bank account will be funds to help you find temporary housing. Now, that
Right.
doesn't mean that they've got hotels or apartments listed anywhere. It just says that you have funding to be able to get temporary housing right away.
Is that part of the, so I want to get into costs, some of the money myths around FEMA. So what I'm hearing from people is that immediately they will be, as you mentioned, like $750 will be going straight into their bank account, which in Los Angeles does not take you far
Yeah.
at all, right? Like at all. So when someone calls and they provide their state or their information, their address, it's verified via the zip code, as you mentioned. What happens then in terms of the funding? So they do they get $750 upon verification immediately? And then what happens after that in terms of continued funds for the short term? And then we'll get into insurance for the long term.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, what they'll do is FEMA will ask you, do you have insurance? You know, in a wildfire scenario, a lot of people have insurance, and we can talk about those who do not. But for the
Yeah.
most part, they do have insurance. And so what they're prohibited by federal law from duplicating resources of funding. And
Mm,
so if somebody has insurance that will pay for their living expenses, FEMA's position is we can't provide you money for that. But in the process of people say, I apply, I'm not sure about the insurance, then FEMA will fund it to a degree and ask for that money back later on. But the idea is when you're registering, they're going to ask you for insurance papers. Have you talked to your insurance agent and what is available through your policy? And then
mhm.
what they'll do, the 750 is certainly in advance to get people going in like 24, 48-hour period,
Yeah.
but they will fund again through electronic transfer what is known as market rate hotel motel stay. So whatever that market is, and if the market's been driven up because of supply and demand, they'll recognize that. And
Mm,
so the idea is to get you funding as quickly as possible so you can get shelter. Also, at the same time, what they're doing is they're partnering with the state and local folks, county, and opening shelters. And so
yeah.
at least it's a place for people to go that's safe, they can gather. There's meals, if they need water, meals ready to eat, cots,
Mhm.
security. They'll work with what's known as the non-governmental agencies, Red Cross typically, and
Yeah.
they'll provide resources so that people at least have a place to stay in the short term before they transition to short-term housing.
Hmm. When I think about the documentation that people need to prove this, say everything's burned down, say they didn't grab their wallet or their ID or any paperwork, what documents do people need to proof of residence if they don't have anything at all?
Yeah, what will happen is, they're going to ask, please register name, address, phone number, banking information. Do you have insurance? Okay, can you please provide that insurance paperwork to us, et cetera? And so they'll go through that process. Then, if you talk about a little bit time down the way, and we're talking about, although temporary, but not immediate. They'll have housing inspectors actually going into the neighborhood
Mm.
along with what we call disaster survivor assistance. And so once that area is deemed safe for people to go into, you're going to have folks going into that area going kind of neighborhood by neighborhood. Now, if your neighborhood's destroyed, that doesn't
Mhm.
really help you a lot. That's why the encouragement is for people to register as quickly as possible, start that communication process. And to add to that process, what happens is what I think it's kind of what you're talking about in your neighborhood. They'll open up as what's known as disaster recovery centers
Yeah.
in a gym, a church, a large convention hall. They'll bring agencies from the local, state, and federal. So it could be Small Business Administration, unemployment, FEMA, Red Cross, Salvation Army, an array of agencies under one roof so people can go in and get their questions answered and what resources they need, figure out how to access that.
Hmm. The so when we drove by the other day, there was Red Cross, there was FEMA, there was Salvation Army, and I believe there was one other that I can't recall. But actually driving through and seeing it's in the old West Side Pavilion, at least on the west side, and I can find out the address for the Altadena one. But the old West Side Pavilion around Westwood Boulevard and Pico Boulevards here, and inside they've got huge poster boards, like that basically if you work in a creative industry and you're brainstorming, it's the ones you put against the wall. They're as tall as the entire wall from floor to ceiling,
Mm.
and they have different pillars and different like areas. And one of them says prescriptions.
Yeah.
So for someone who is battling with their insurance because all of their prescription medication literally was lost in the fire. And I've
Yeah.
seen people who are going through cancer treatment and require their chemotherapy, similar to my husband who takes chemotherapy pills every morning. What would someone like a FEMA do to help someone get those prescriptions or much needed medication that they've lost?
Yeah, what they would do is they would rely more on local officials in that particular case. They're going to make sure it gets done. But remember, all this is about a partnership. So whether the
Yeah.
federal government can't offer it or can offer it, they're going to try and figure out amongst the different tiers of government, your local city, your county, your state, your federal. Who's going to provide that service in terms of prescription because your paperwork's burned up once you go talk to those officials. And what FEMA does too is they bring out, for instance, during disasters, they bring out what's known as disaster medical assistance teams.
Mm.
And they're doctors and nurses that from all over the country that come in moments of crisis to help their fellow Americans. It's a wonderful thing. And so you'll have doctors and nurses that can set up field hospitals if necessary, or even go to the degree that you're talking about. Let's staff this DRC and figure out what we can do to help these people get their prescriptions.
Yeah. I mean, I have to tell you, the, the best of humanity is coming out.
Yes.
It really is. Like it makes me emotional to think of all the people that I know have lost things and in some cases lost everything. But to see the way that Los Angeles has come together
Yeah.
as a fairly it's one of the biggest cities in the entire
Yes.
country, if not the entire world, and it often can feel quite isolating because you're going from your home to your car to your work to your car back to your home, and if you don't have a community, it can feel like a tough city to make it in. But it really feels like a big small town right now. Like to your point, convention centers, stores are giving away free items. My friend's dad, who lost everything, he went to Banana Republic in Pasadena, and they outfitted him with brand new khakis and a sport coat and button down, and he just felt, in his words, he felt like human again. He felt clean again,
Yeah.
right? Like it was those small things and just the donation centers everywhere. It's just truly incredible. That
Yeah.
said, on the other front,
Yeah.
um, there have been some scams.
Hmm.
Right. So I want to also talk about some scams because in the best of times, there are opportunists who
Yeah.
also, if they're going into the burn areas and they're trying to loot, right? But there's
Yeah.
also financial scams. So
Yeah.
can you talk a bit to that and what it looks like and how people can avoid them?
Yeah, we sure can. I do want to touch on what you had said just a few moments ago, because I think
Sure.
this is a key point, and I really do enjoy sharing this. And that is that when Americans are at our worst, it's also when we're at our best. And
Yeah.
I've seen this time and time again in disasters where communities are destroyed. They're going through the grieving process and may have lost their business, their house, all those mementos that are so important, Johnny's cleats, the photographs, all those things. Very, very difficult time. But what you see is the best of humanity. And it sets politics aside in many cases, that there
Yeah.
isn't even a discussion about that. It's people recognizing that other people need help. And they come in some cases at no compensation. I've seen high school gyms that have become makeshift town squares where, to your point, donations are coming. People are bringing food and fixing meals, and it
Yeah.
provides that comfort, that togetherness, the belonging. And although it may take time, what happens typically is these communities are stronger in terms of actual rebuilding their fire station, library, water system, sewer system, whatever that is, but also the bonds that are created amongst the people who have gone through this is even tighter. So the community, again, takes time. It comes out of it even stronger and more together when before the incident actually happened. It's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah, I really, really hope that that's the case here. I mean, we'll talk about timeline too, because this is going to take the scale of the damage when you see it on TV or you see it online and, people, flyovers, when you don't live here, it's really, it looks horrible, right? It
Yeah.
looks like a bomb went off, but it is really incredibly difficult to understand the scale of it. And
Yeah.
I think in addition to the actual like kind of forest burn areas, but the urban burn areas with the homes just between Altadena and the Pacific Palisades, it's more than 3 times the island of Manhattan.
Wow.
And for anyone who knows New York, like Manhattan's a big island. Like
Yeah.
New York is a really big, small city, right? It's huge, but imagine 3 Manhattans, and that's how many square miles of homes have burned down. So it's really, really difficult to get the scale of it. But to your point, it's so amazing to see. Like we actually can't. I've tried to volunteer multiple times. I've only been successful once because all of the volunteer slots are taken every single day.
Mm.
And it's incredible to see people come together here and do anything they can, anytime they can, for anyone that they can.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, and it happens across the country, which is wonderful, especially at a time when we sense to be a little divided politically with the election and everything.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that's set aside, but I don't want to. I'd be remiss if I didn't come back and answer your question about scams.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry you can't find a place to volunteer, but in some sense, that's kind of a good thing. Good thing.
Yeah. I'll take
Um,
it. Listen, we're here for the long term, right? It's like
yeah.
you got to be part of it for the long term, not just the
Yeah.
short term. So it's
Yeah,
just
well
fine with
said,
me.
Christy. Well said. Scams. People are going to try and loot, but I will tell you also what is happening in LA is the district attorney, some of the sheriffs, we're talking about police officers that have come from all over the state. And it's
Oh
not
yeah.
your typical police officer. It might be, a federal Department of Homeland Security, might be custom and border protection. It's just an array of people that come to help. And firefighters are getting the adulations, which is certainly appreciated, but I want people to understand that it's not just them that's doing the work. You got thousands of police officers working long, long hours because
Yeah.
there's no relief protecting those communities, those neighborhoods. And if they find people like we saw, not too long ago, somebody had an old fire engine they'd bought and they
Yeah.
dressed up in wild Cal Fire gear and they were trying to get through the barricade from the police officers who had blocked off the neighborhood. And I imagine they were going to go in and try and steal people's property. They caught
Yeah.
them and they kind of threw the book at them. They're not taking anything for granted and they're being very aggressive about that message. So
Yeah.
on site, that's a good thing. Now, when we talk about some of the scams that come with regards to computers or telephone, what I would encourage people to do is that understand there is only one phone number and email that you're going to get stuff from. So if
Mm.
FEMA's asking you for your social security or your banking information, you're going to initiate that call. You might get a call back, but confirm who they are, where they're calling from, get an employee name and number. If you're feeling uncomfortable about that, you can certainly just say, I'll get back to you.
Mhm.
Let me call you back. You can go down to the local disaster recovery centers, talk to people there just to make sure you're comfortable. That's kind of the more formal side of moving money and aid. But
Mhm.
also, people take advantage of it from the standpoint of raising money. There's
Yes.
so much gratitude and graciousness from people trying to help, like we talked about a few minutes ago. There are bad people that are going to want to take advantage of that. So what we encourage people to do is make sure you're donating to a specific, whether it's Red Cross, Salvation Army, faith-based, whatever it is. take a look at the email. Go on their website. Um, Try to follow that as best as possible. If somebody's sending you a link and asking for donations, that's a red flag right there. You don't want to do that. You should be initiating that contribution on your own to an
Mhm.
official website.
Yes, that is great, great, great advice because we're getting a lot of those texts similar to the political fundraising text during the like pre-election, but we're getting a lot of those GoFundMe texts or donate will match the donation here, and it's no one you've ever heard of, and it's a complete spam text in
Yeah,
addition to the email. So absolutely do the due diligence. If nothing else, just look at the email address, and oftentimes you can spot a spam email address right away.
well said.
Right away. You are right now we're in the thick of it talking about talking with insurance companies, which is this is perfect timing.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know kind of the relationship. It sounds like they're complementary. FEMA and local agencies and insurance obviously don't want to duplicate the resources. But what are you hearing and seeing right now as it relates to people making insurance claims and kind of what's the process of doing that and what are you hearing in terms of experiences?
Yeah, what we know is as the Pacific Palisades, and I don't know the statistics on the Altadena side just yet, but we know that 70% of the people in Pacific Palisades had insurance, 30% did
Mm,
not.
okay.
That insurance can be through the California Fair Plan, which is the insurance of last resort, or it can be through retail outlets such as Pure, in some cases Allstate or whatever. There's been a lot of cancellations and retail insurance companies moving out of the market. So that's compounded this because
Yeah.
people have had to go to the fair plan, and we can talk a little bit about that. But in terms of people, if they haven't already, make sure they get a hold of that insurance company ASAP.
Mhm.
Document everything you can. If you're not able to get back to your home because it's not safe and they've kind of cordoned that off. My understanding is they're starting to repopulate those areas that you can get a permit, you can get in there and you can take a look at what it looks like, take pictures.
Correct.
Hopefully
Yeah.
you've done some work ahead of it, that you've got pictures or receipts or mementos. We take a picture when we're at a family dinner in our house. Well, hey, that will work too for
Yeah.
justifying what in your house. And so anything that you might have with regards to that, that's helpful. And so the insurance then should step forward and give you living expenses for a period of time. What I'm hearing is the insurance companies as a group are providing up to 30% of the claim. I think it's up to $250,000 for folks to
Okay.
be able to get started in the recovery process. And so this is going to be a long, arduous thing, even if you have insurance, because of the state of the insurance industry in California now.
Yeah. Yeah. When a 30% of what, can you clarify what that means?
It's usually 30% of your living expenses. You'll have protection for the house. Okay, I have to rebuild my home,
Right.
whatever cost that is. And you're hoping that you have extended coverage,
Mm,
building upgrades. Many people are probably underinsured because they just, at the time, that, we just don't pay attention to that sometimes. Not because we're bad
that's right.
people. It's not exactly a priority. But if you've got that adequate insurance, they're going to provide you living expenses. So that means whatever, it's really a deposit of a check that you can use to manage your day-to-day life. It's not
Okay.
to rebuild the house, but it's, medical care. Let's hope this isn't the case. Funeral expenses,
Mhm.
prescriptions, clothing, food, shelter. All of
Yeah.
that's wrapped underneath living expenses.
Okay. And why is it 30%?
I don't know specifically. I think that's a determination by the insurance companies because
Sure.
honestly, they're trying to figure out how to manage this loss too.
Sure.
So, we can talk a little bit about the FAIR plan if you'd like, but
I would actually, because someone got in touch with me on Threads on a Meta platform and was saying there's no excuse for people in the Palisades or anywhere else to not have had fire insurance. If they didn't have if they were dropped by their carrier, they had no excuse not to be on the fair plan. And they were very aggressive about it. And I'm not familiar with the fair plan, so would love to hear more about it.
sure. What happened was, this was earlier, if you will, in California's history with regards to wildfire. And when I say that, we're probably talking 5, 10 years. As we
Mm,
started to experience, two things happened. people started to move into what's known as an urban interface, meaning that we've got builders building beautiful homes or developments in areas that are closer to the forest.
Right.
Wild and urban interface, they call it WUI. With that in mind, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but the challenge becomes the wildfires. And so when these fires are burning, and the irony to all of this is it doesn't matter whether you're in the forest or adjacent to the forest. What we're seeing in Colorado, very urbanized, very new construction, 1,000 houses and businesses burnt in a matter of hours. We
Mm.
saw that up in Santa Rosa, where although you might not be next to the forest, you're still losing your homes and businesses to wildfire. So to some degree, it's just an unknown. But the idea behind it was the insurance companies started to experience a tremendous amount of loss. They
Mhm.
were having to pay out a lot of claims. And so they started to say, we're going to up premiums to a degree. Then eventually it said, we're not going to insure people in high hazard areas.
Mhm.
So that threw a little bit of fear, understandably. Oh my gosh, yeah, if you've got your home, you're trying to find insurance and nobody wants to insure our number one investment, our home. What do you
Right.
do? So California stepped forward and said, we're going to put together what is known as California Fair Plan, an insurance fund, last resort, in which if you live in a high hazard area, you can go get your home insured up to $3 million. Many of these folks and your listeners, I'm sure will know this, is they had to also go buy a separate policy from an insurance company to cover the other perils that take place. So you're carrying two different plans to protect your home. Now, the challenge being with the FAIR plan is that the government, state of California, never anticipated the amount of people that were going to participate in the fund.
Mm.
So you now have, in a short period of time, a tremendous amount of policyholders in the FAIR plan. The FAIR plan, the last time we looked, had, and don't hold me to the exact dollar figure, but somewhere around $340 million.
Okay.
Well, the challenge to that is they have, quote, a deductible. And that means the FAIR plan has to have 900, let's see if I get this right, $900 million
Okay.
available to pay claims. Once they do that, then it triggers a mechanism which says the insurance companies have to step up to fill that void, and the California Fair Plan has what is known as reinsurance. Crazy,
Mm.
I know it sounds, but another company is insuring the California Fair Plan.
Oh my gosh.
And so that, I believe, again, don't hold me to the numbers, these are rough, but the FAIR plan had to reach, the 900 million, they hit the deductible, they pay that. Now it triggers about 6 billion in reinsurance, but the claims, we're talking probably 10, 20 billion. Who knows what it's going to be?
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
the challenge is going to come here. How does the government, state government, fill the void between what the reinsurance and what the insurance company may pay? How do you fill that void? Is it going to be federal funding? Is it going to be saying the state of California is going to have a separate assessment, separate legislation? Just recently, I think they passed a $2.3 billion
Yeah.
LA disaster fund to help out. But now
That's
it's
right.
the
Yeah.
discussion's going to have to be, how do we handle this delta where we've now don't have the funding to help some of these folks?
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion that may come back on policyholders across the entire state, whether you live in LA or not, to fill that void. There's discussion about federal legislation to help. It's not known right now. There are people working on it, I'm sure, but that adds a whole different element to this than we traditionally have not seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the question mark right now around the federal government's response and legislation around having conditions tied to aid, which we've never seen in the
Yes,
history of the country. So it's
yes.
precarious place to be. Now, is the fair plan expensive for insurance holders? And obviously you're talking about it as a supplementary plan to the other one you mentioned, but is it cost effective or is it something that's too expensive to afford?
Well, that's a good question. In the sense that this is my investment and I've got to protect it. You're still it's the insurance policy of last resort. You had nowhere else to go.
Right, right.
And because that pool of policyholders is, in a high hazard area that the retail market's not going to cover it. That
Mhm.
tells you that that loss potential is great. So to your point and your question is the cost of that fair plan, those premiums are expensive. No
Yeah.
question. They're higher than what you would get in retail if you could find a retail insurer that was willing to insure your property.
Yeah. I think this is a really good opportunity to remind people to check their insurance coverage, even if you're in a low fire zone. I mean, we certainly just did. And I used to work for Farmers Insurance on the actual like within the corporation itself, and learned a lot about home and fire and auto insurance, umbrella insurance, all those things. And even I was like, Brian, to my husband, do we have fire insurance? And we got in touch with the State Farm, and we do because we're in a low fire insurance, but we didn't have the cover. I mean, the coverage that we would have had to rebuild was so small. And he's like, well, for another $30 a year, you can up it to an additional $280,000, and it's a no-brainer. I'm like, well, how did we not know that before? And people don't check their insurance until it's too late, and then
Yeah.
you are in a really difficult position when you are absolutely devastated. And no one wants to experience that. And I know too many people experiencing that right now.
Yeah.
So just take the time, take 10 minutes to get in touch with your insurance agent and just get clarity on what your policy covers. If there's supplemental insurance you need to ask about, if you are not covered, what are the other options? Is it the fair plan? But do yourself a favor. This is my insurance PSA, and just be clear on what you have covered and what you don't.
Oh, that's dynamite information. Absolutely. And the cost to increase those limits
Mm,
is fairly negligible when you talk about and rebuilding. What we're seeing and we're going to see here, no question, is the building costs are going to be much higher than most people have covered insurance for.
sure.
Right? Because you just at the time you're asking for, if you will, give me the max insurance available. And they will do that for you. But they're kind of calculating to rebuild your house. Will you rebuild the whole thing? Most people who have a traditional, if you will, traditional house fire, gosh bless, um,
Yeah.
it doesn't burn your entire house. Now, in this case, people have lost their entire house. They're having to start from scratch. So the per square foot cost to rebuild is going to be astronomical. There was no way for the insurance industry necessarily to calculate that.
Yeah. Oh,
You just
sure.
couldn't fathom it. And so your PSA about the insurance is so valuable for those of us who haven't experienced it, is to take that time. That's great advice.
Thank you. It's so important to just know. Again, you don't want to be caught flat-footed in a horrible situation. Now, what about FEMA and insurance coverage for people whose homes are still standing, but they cannot live in them? Obviously don't have water. Everything in it is completely damaged by smoke.
Yeah.
Does FEMA and insurance apply to those folks as well?
Yes. And
Okay.
and there's a stipulation here that I want to share with folks because I think sometimes a misunderstanding is that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and whether it's fires, floods, hurricanes, whatever the incident is, the maximum amount today that an individual can get is approximately $40,000. And that's a shocker because it sounds like, well, in California, the real estate values are so high, that's not going to help me.
Oh, yeah.
If FEMA was never designed to be an all-inclusive rebuild your home insurance policy.
Mhm.
It's designed to help you get through a period of time. It's to partner up in most cases for those folks who don't have insurance, or even those who do that lack. It's the way to partner with the Small Business Administration. And I know that sounds crazy, but most disaster recovery comes from people's savings, some money from FEMA, also low cost loans through the Small Business Administration.
Mm,
And those can be $2 million, I think, or $3 million for a home. And it goes higher for, your businesses. They'll give you living expenses. They'll wrap your existing mortgage in if you want. And so now, if you want to borrow a certain amount of money, and you can wrap the mortgage in there. But the idea behind that is they're low interest rate loans.
right. Right. The I'm so curious about people who I did some research on this, on having to pay your mortgage
Yeah.
despite having a destroyed home, paying a mortgage on a home that doesn't exist
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
right? And then trying to find somewhere else to live, which in
Yeah,
LA, the rents are astronomical, multiple thousands for a one bedroom apartment, right?
yeah.
And so having to manage that, I'm assuming that that's something that the insurance companies are dealing with, like mortgage insurance, or having a deferment. I believe Governor Newsom, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was a 6 month deferment for anyone, 3 or 6 month deferment for people needing to make their mortgage payments, but that's going to go by in the blink of an eye,
Yeah.
right? So do you have any advice for people who are navigating that landscape?
Well, keep in mind when they say deferment, what that means is you don't necessarily have to pay your mortgage for a period of time. That doesn't mean that that money goes away. You still owe it.
That's right.
And so I don't want people to feel like, okay, for 6 months I can kind of depend upon that. And unfortunately, that's not the case.
Right.
Um, and maybe this is a time to talk about the emotional part of this too, and we come back to
Yes.
the more technical aspect of it. But the way you've just articulated what people are facing, in a moment's notice, I'm sleeping, my phone's going off, I hear sirens outside, something's happening, I'm going to wake up, and I see a police car driving up and down the street telling us to get out, get out, get out. And you're like, what's going on? You see people start to leave, you realize there's a problem. And to your point earlier in our conversation, people left with whatever clothes they had on their back.
Yeah.
Grab what you can. It's moments notice. It's not like, hey, we have hours to evacuate. In some cases, the evacuation notice and the warning came, but the fire in this case was burning so quick, so fast that there wasn't even time necessarily to get some of those evacuation out in certain areas where the fire was already starting to grow. Downrange a little bit, different scenario. But with that in mind, now you're kind of stepping 4 hours later and you realize, man, I have nothing. I
Yeah.
mean, what do I do? I've lost everything, and I don't want to compound it by rehashing what they're facing. But that breeds what is, you're going through what Keebler-Ross, the author, talks about, well, no, for grief. You're
Yeah.
going through an actual grief scenario, just as if you've lost a loved one. You're going to
Absolutely.
go through the steps involved in it, bargaining, the justification, the I'm going to ignore it. So people who are experienced in that, your listeners, please understand that that's very normal to be feeling abnormal.
Yes. Yes. And just the brain fog it's not, it's grief, but it's trauma,
Yeah.
right? Which is both like different sides of the same coin, two sides of the same coin, if you will. And the brain fog that comes along with that, the forgetfulness, the bone tired exhaustion that comes along with that, and then having to figure out all of this
Yeah.
on top of it, figuring out where, I mean, if you even have a car, right? Like you
Yeah.
jumped in, wait, one car, then the majority of these people who left, again, this has never happened in Los Angeles's history, anything like this that I'm aware of. And people expected to just go back a few hours later. So they just left.
Yeah.
The other people, this is really more primarily for people in Altadena. It was bearing down so quickly on that neighborhood coming down the hills. And it was in the middle of the night when the second alert went out and the power was out. So imagine waking up in the middle of the night, your
Mm,
power is out, you're
mm,
trying to negotiate yourself, a pet,
mm.
children, in the dark with fire literally looming outside, smoke everywhere, fire engines, and they're like, get out of your house now.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, not to belabor the point, but I want people to understand the reality of what happened to some of these people. And some other ones were just like, I didn't take it seriously. I grabbed a
Hmm.
few things, I'm like, okay, I'll be back in a few hours.
Hmm.
Never in a million years did I expect my entire home and everything in it that I've worked my entire life to have and to build to be
Yeah.
completely gone.
Yeah. In a
Right.
moment's notice.
Correct,
Yeah.
right. And it's just unbelievable. And then again, to just have this level of detail from you on what FEMA is, how it contributes to helping, and then what some of the issues with insurance. It's so helpful.
Uh,
I appreciate your time so much.
well, you're
I'm
more
wondering
than welcome.
if you can talk about, are there any mistakes that people make in the beginning, right? Because of the emotions that they're going through? Are there things that they should do or things that they shouldn't do in the first few weeks, or days and weeks after this type of disaster?
Yep. Yes, and let me talk about that. But before we do this, I just want
Mm,
to digress a little bit and not leave people too much hanging. It's like we've described very traumatic, difficult times and how to get through
mm,
that. What we do know from research is that those people who are actively involved in the recovery of themselves, their life, and their community do better long term from an emotional and mental standpoint.
Mhm.
So you certainly want to be involved, engaged, trying to take care of, but also what we've found is that people coming together as groups, whether it's by neighborhood, by your church, friends, simply friends, people you work with, when a number of those who have experienced the same thing can come together frequently and organize, it's very, very helpful for them. Because what's happened is everybody's going through the scenario the same, and they may learn something specific about insurance that somebody else did not know.
Yeah.
And so by having those conversations, hey, I'm not sure about this. Well, this is what I did, or how you feeling, or what's going on here. Having that group, that community, that sense of community is absolutely huge in
Yeah.
helping you mental well-being as well as facilitating the recovery process for you. Now
That
with,
is,
oh, I'm
oh,
sorry, go ahead. No, no,
no,
please.
I'm just going to say that's such an important point, and thank you for bringing that up. And I love that the research proves it too. But the two, it's so interesting because the horror and the beauty of this is the two communities that were impacted, the Pacific Palisades and Altadena, were two of the most community-based neighborhoods in all of Los Angeles, if I'm being honest. And there are, I already see online, I've heard direct stories from friends and family friends, the groups, the group texts that their neighbors already had, like our neighborhood had, we have a group text and checking on each other, making sure that they got out okay. The one who was able to go back and letting everyone know, I'm so sorry, we all lost everything.
Mm,
But then seeing that they've actually come together to go meet at a restaurant in a private room and they're all grieving together and
yeah.
they're exchanging that information and helpful tips, or how do you even get started, or I found this one little memento when I went back and I wanted to make sure that you got it, and it just happened to not burn down. So that aspect of community and sharing online to like what you're going through, the things that you found, what your plans are, has been so incredibly helpful for people. So thank you for getting into that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's a joy to see it when it's happening too. I'm sorry it's for the reasons it's happening.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned earlier, that's going to breed long-term closeness bonding for that community that's going to be stronger once they get through all this.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
with regards to what not to do, what I liken it is what they tell you when you lose your spouse, a loved one, is not to make an initial decision within a period of time because emotion overrides our rational thought process at times. So if people can do some of the simple things, and that is you got to find shelter, whether that's a hotel, motel, apartment, other friends, family, whatever, and you're going to need clothes, all of those things that are essential. You certainly want to work on that. You can get assistance financially from FEMA. We talked about that, or your insurance company. If you have documentation, make sure you know where that is, things like that. But what I'd also encourage people to do is not act too quickly with regards to insurance settlements, um, permanent decisions,
Mhm.
where the kid's going to go to school. I mean, that's a big thing too. How are we going to facilitate this? I've got to go to work here. You're going there. How do we fit? Those are decisions that you can concentrate on, and there's not small, but somewhat easily to be able to make that decision. But try not to make the big ones.
Yeah.
Take a breath, get the information, talk to your neighbors. Usually, what happens is people regret making a decision too early in the process, and then they regret that down the road.
Yeah.
I know that's hard because you got so much happening. You're trying to get your life back. You feel that need of urgency, but I just, take a moment, take a breath, be cautionary if you can. I know that's hard. That's not an easy thing to do. But
Yeah.
if they can try that, that tends to lend better decisions in down the road.
I've heard the advice, don't sign anything
Mm,
right away. Don't
yeah,
sign anything. Whatever what your insurance company puts in front of you first and foremost, the first offer, don't sign it. Like
yeah,
to your point, just take a beat, ask your neighbors, ask for expert, talk to a lawyer if you need to, just to
yep,
get clarity on what the options are. And yes, of course, you're feeling a level of desperation because your brain is quite literally having to destroy and rewire itself for a new reality, which takes years,
Your
right?
point about the insurance is a good one too. I'm sorry to
Mm.
interrupt.
No,
Please go
please go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I think that was a good one. The insurance companies, they want to help. I've dealt with them time and time again in terms of disasters. And, they'll come out and they'll provide a washing dryer trailer so people in
Mm.
disasters, they can go get their clothes washed. I mean, they
Yeah.
do care. They're compassionate. In a lot of cases, the insurance people have family or live in the neighborhood, much like first responders, utility workers, the police officers, public works. They live in the community too. So they have a vested interest. They want it to go right.
Yeah.
That being said, there's also a cautionary note. And what we do know statistically is those homeowners, businesses that have an intermediary between themselves and the insurance company, a public adjuster, tend to get more proceeds from the insurance company than had you done it on your own.
That's brilliant. Yes, that's such good advice. That's such good advice.
And they have existing relationships with the insurance company.
Right.
They understand the process. They understand, it's just like you're buying expertise from somebody. You go to the dentist, you want somebody to be good, you trust them, but you want somebody that understands that subject matter, has dealt
Right.
with it before. Now, with that being said, make sure you pick the right one. And that's again where you can, as a group, as a neighborhood, once you land on somebody that you feel comfortable, competent, has a great reputation. And there are many adjusters that have established themselves with insurance company and are respected because they know how to broker, if you will, a good deal for the homeowner as well as the insurance company and
Yeah.
facilitate that and sometimes can move that process quicker because they have a reputation that's built. So you got to be careful who you hire, but
Yeah.
there are some good ones out there.
That is fantastic advice, without a doubt. I'm thinking about, just as we talk about the emotional aspect of this, like mental health resources, like does FEMA provide mental health resources, or is that something that's really up to the homeowner and the victims?
They do. And when I say FEMA, I kind of put that under the umbrella local, state,
Sure.
county government. If you go into the local assistance center, there
Mhm.
are counseling centers that are available there which can talk to you almost immediately,
Mm.
or you can schedule appointments or figure out a resource and where to go to get that. And I would encourage anybody to do that. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're not strong or that,
Sure. Oh,
for
oh God.
some reason, you're worried about a reputation business wise or whatever. You pick the right folks, it's confidential. It,
Mhm.
it can help you tremendously get through a very difficult time.
Absolutely. Again, this is trauma. This is like the
Yeah.
loss of a spouse, loss of a loved one, loss of a home. This is unbelievable trauma. And so this is not something that people should just try to shove away and continue on, because it is going to come back, whether it makes you sick physically, whether it makes you sick mentally. Like, people need to process this and work through it.
Yeah.
One you actually mentioned earlier, and I just want to make this point about like faith-based organizations. Actually, churches kind of on the down low are actually looking to provide support for fire victims. And
Mm.
one in our neighborhood, one of our neighbors let me know that they are actually looking to provide financial support. So I was able to get two $100 gift
Oh.
cards for my friend whose dad's home burned down in Altadena. And she was able to give it to him to at least do something with it. So there are, again, if you check with you have local resources, you've got FEMA, all of these things, but also check with your local churches, because the deacons are the ones who actually they have funds and they can do a write-off they're looking to support. So just for consideration.
That's a wonderful point because FEMA is a coordinating agency. They partner with state and local, and they're trying to come in to help. They'll provide resources in the short term, but they're not going to solve it. And what I've seen over the years is that the faith-based, non-governmental agencies, really the recovery comes from community-based.
Yeah.
FEMA will provide, facilitate. They certainly help in that regard, but bar none, it's people helping people that
Yeah.
is more impactful in the recovery than a federal agency.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. Now, just a few more things, and I think these are two big topics, but thinking about the recovery efforts, right? And cleaning this out. And again, I mentioned the scale of this. What are your thoughts on what needs to happen? I mean, because this is essentially if I'm just guessing, I'm spitballing as someone who's not an expert in this, this requires basically cleaning out every single thing, including energy sources, gas lines, like the toxic waste that exists from all of the asbestos and the plastic burning. I mean, I can't even imagine what a cleanup looks like in a rebuild. Like, do you have any insight there?
Yeah, a couple of things. The people who are in charge right now for the Federal Emergency Management Agency designated by the president, and I'm going to call them out by name, two of them, and that's Robert Fenton, the administrator of Region 9. I've worked with him extensively, and he's one of the best emergency managers around. He came from, working with Paradise, went to
Mm.
Lahaina, and now he's over here.
Wow.
So he's got a tremendous amount of experience. They've got also a former CAL FIRE chief who's
Mhm.
also in a leadership position here in LA. So that's wonderful because of his background, his knowledge, skills, and abilities. So your listeners should know that they've got some of the best people on the planet helping them.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing to know. That's incredible. I mean, wow, Paradise Lahaina and now this.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
in terms of next steps, if you will, they're going to try what we call repopulate, meaning allowing people to get in, to sift through, try and find those mementos, whether it's a wedding ring, something of that nature you're trying to gather, you're trying to get a sense of what's left. A lot of cases, it's a slab, ash,
Mhm.
and a chimney. And so
Yeah.
what happens is you're getting very high readings of lead, arsenic, some of the more dangerous chemicals. And that dust, because the fire came through with such high temperature, it destroys everything and creates layers of dust and ash. When you step on that dust, it becomes airborne
Yeah.
and it's just so fine. So the trouble is, it gets on the bottom of your shoes, it
Yeah.
gets on your clothes, you breathe it in, the mouth and nose.
Mhm.
So that's what they're concerned about, and the levels are very, very high. So they're trying to manage people's, desire to get into that neighborhood, take a look, with also providing safety. Now, what will happen eventually is that they're going to turn around and start, they've already started it to some degree, my understanding, is the debris operation,
Mhm.
meaning that FEMA, as an individual, and this is important, if you feel like that, and they've designated the neighborhood open, you as an individual can get a permit from the fire department or from EPA that says, I want to take care of my own debris cleanup. And then once you get that permit, you can start the process on your own. So,
Oh,
so that's something that people choose to do.
okay.
As a group, what will happen? And when I say a group, I mean large. FEMA will partner with the state of California and the city of Los Angeles, and they will start doing debris cleanup. They will hire a contractor or contractors working through what's known as the Army Corps of Engineers. This
Mhm.
is typical, it's happened before. And the Army Corps will be a general contractor subordinate to the FEMA Incident Command. And it remind me to tell you about the Unified Coordination Group when I end this, because it's important for people to understand. But
Sure.
as they go through here, the Army Corps has standing contracts with debris haulers. And so what they're going to do is contract for debris cleanup. That company will come in and they will scoop up with safety precautions, hazardous material, classification and transportation to a specific location that will accept that type of debris, and they will, in essence, shovel it all up, package it up, put it in the truck, seal the truck up so that it doesn't get airborne as they transport. And then they're probably going to have to go down maybe a foot, maybe lower to the soil level and get to a point where that lot is pretty much safe so
Yeah.
that people can go in and start the rebuild. So the federal government in partnership will help people do that if they want that.
Okay. I'm just thinking of the scale of that
Yeah.
is unbelievable to go down
Yes.
a foot and to think again, thinking about the gas lines, the electrical lines, all these things that are melted.
Yes.
What, so you mentioned the Unified Coordination Group.
Yeah, the reason I mention that is sometimes it's an unknown thing that you very rarely see. But
Mm.
honestly, in our country, after Katrina, one of the mandates was that you would as a state, you will have to use what's known as the Incident Command System to manage your disaster if you want, and I see you being the state, wants
Mhm.
to receive preparedness money, grant money, or recovery money.
Mm.
And so this started at the time I went to work for FEMA, and the incident command system was actually born out of wildfires in California in the 70s.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
They got so good through trial and error of managing multiple resources and having them get organized that they built this system, and it's been refined over the years. And it's really a management system that you could use day-to-day operations. But part of that component is you have what's known as a unified coordination group.
Mm.
Think of it like a board of directors of a corporation.
Sure.
And so they have a designated federal FCO, Federal Coordinating Officer, a state coordinating officer. Then they have lead agency representatives, and you come to the table only if you have authority and decision-making authority. In other words,
Okay.
funding as well as decision-making. They will bring together that group and whatever they feel is necessary in terms, do you need FBI? Do you need, EPA? Do you need Army Corps? Whatever that is. And that group will act as setting goals and objectives for each 24-hour period. And they say, this is what we want to concentrate on. The nice part about it, it's a partnership with federal, state, and local individuals with authority to be able to act. And then from there, without getting too deep into it, they start to direct staff to accomplish certain objectives in geographic regions,
Okay.
whatever that is. And it could be diverse. Altadena may be in a different position that Pacific Palisades is. It really depends. And so the idea behind that is to be able to every 24 hours, they create a business plan. It's called an incident action plan. And it's fully inclusive about different information. And so I say that without trying to get too deep into the weeds here, but I want people to understand that this is a partnership.
Mhm.
And that's what you'll hear them talk about. So you're trying to get those people not from Washington, D.C. coming down to mandate. They're there to partner with the local people, the local folks, the local emergency management to figure out how to solve these problems.
I mean, that's beautiful, the partnership, and ideally, that's how it should work,
Yeah,
right? And supporting, especially taking any of the politics out of this.
yeah.
When the timeline of rebuilding, I've heard anything from, 2 years just to clean it out, just to literally get all the debris out. But then, 10 years
Yeah.
to really actually having everything rebuilt. When people who have lost everything are considering staying, going, rebuilding, not, are there any considerations that you would recommend when they're making that big decision?
Yeah, that is a big one. First one I would say is don't make that decision anytime soon.
Right, right.
Get through the process. What I also want to do is make sure people are realistic with those people who are suffering. And so a lot of times what I share with folks is think about in a perfect scenario, if we wanted to go build a house, how long would it take aside from permits and codes and funding? We just said, okay, today we're going to start building this house. How long does it take to do that? A year and a half, 2 years,
That's
maybe?
right. Right. Depending on the size and scale, sure. And the homes in the Palisades are not small.
Yeah, and even,
Yeah.
Altadena might be a little more modest, but you have that same scenario. Now add on
Right.
top of that, that the soil has to be, you got to remove the debris. We've
Yeah.
got to go through the permitting process. And I know they're streamlining. They want to make this move quickly, which is admirable.
Mhm.
But when you think about the complexity, now if you're building that house, you have to have a gas line, you got to have a water, and you got to have sewer.
That's right.
Typically, you just go hook up to that without a problem. Well, in those areas where the fire's gone through, a lot of those systems are contaminated and
Mhm.
in some cases have to be rebuilt or a portion of it rebuilt. So you've got some time involved in trying to put the roads and the fire hydrants and the gas lines and the water lines and your cable lines, your internet lines, all back into that area. And what does it look like? Are we going to bury these power lines this time around? So what I try and encourage people, and it's not probably the best news, is just think about how long that's going to take
Yeah.
and try and develop your plan based upon reality. I wish it was short. I wish I could say, we could get it done in a shorter period of time, but that's not fair to people either.
That's right. That's right.
They
It can be
should, yeah,
purgatory.
yeah,
Yeah,
let them know up front, as difficult that is, as emotional as that is, and they're going to get angry and push back on it, which is understandable.
sure.
But at least they know eventually, once the emotion subsides and the rationality kicks in, okay, look, this is what it's going to be. What are we going to do?
That's right. Am I going to put my life on hold for 8 years until I can get back into that type of community and rebuild the community? And how many of my neighbors are staying versus,
Hmm.
starting over somewhere else? I also do want to mention the realtors who are
Mm,
popping up, popping up immediately again, opportunists who are going to, particularly in Altadena, I think maybe less so in the Palisades, but are really trying to exploit and get people
oh,
to sell their properties at a really, really cheap price.
oh, I didn't
Um,
hear that. Yeah.
Right. And that's happening. I saw someone from one of the reality shows, a realtor, talking about how people in the Palisades are looking to sell immediately. And he got a lot of pushback from people saying, no, that is not true. No one's making the decision to sell. Quite the opposite. I'm already hearing from architects and engineers and contractors, whatever, about wanting to rebuild no matter how long it takes. So just a word of caution, like if you've said so smartly, Mark, don't make quick decisions. Don't make a quick decision to sell your property either. Right. There are other ways to get funds to live in the short term. If it's an emergency and you absolutely have to, maybe consider it. But think about that too as you
Yeah.
have predatory real estate agents looking to come and scoop up your property. Also consider who it is.
Yes.
Is it another homeowner? Is it a giant corporation who's just going to create a mall and lose every aspect of culture out of this community? Like, who is actually trying to purchase your property?
Yep. And keep in mind that although this may take time, I understand that, but it's going to be new. It's going to be improved. It's going to be built to new building codes. You're going to
Right.
have to utilize wildfire protection components and preventativeness. And so you have that. And eventually, quite honestly, the trees, the bushes, they do grow back. They go back pretty quick. And
Yeah.
I know that sounds crazy, but down the road, your community is going to look very nice. Wherever you are, whether Palisades or Altadena or somewhere else, it will come back. You'll be surprised how wonderful it is.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it might be some of the most innovative, safest communities, ironically, because, whether you're bearing the power lines, if you're looking at new innovative material that's fire resistant and earthquake resistant, people are really going to have to think about what these types of homes and the building materials look like.
Well
Yeah.
said. Yep.
Yeah. Is there, this has been so helpful, Mark,
Mm.
genuinely. Again, thank you so much. Is there anything that we've forgotten? Is there anything that any last words that you want to share with people? And again, thank you so much for sharing all of this incredible experience that you've had over the years.
Well, thank you for putting this together because I think people
Sure.
are trying to strive and struggle for information, and there's a lot of sources out there to get it. But some of the websites that we've talked about, whether it's Red Cross, Salvation Army, your church, your community, the local government, I think they have certain specific websites set aside. That there is information that's factual. I'd encourage people to go to those sources to be able to, alleviate some of their concerns. With that being said, too, is that I believe this is a standing appointment. If we get feedback from folks that say, hey, I've got these questions, I'm more than willing to come back with you, Christy, and talk some more about whatever we can do to help them.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. And I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. I know just for people's knowledge, I just looked up the FEMA disaster recovery centers in LA and I'll share those addresses really quick. The first one on the west side is the UCLA Research Park West. Again, it's in the old West Side Pavilion building, the intersection of Westwood Boulevard and Pico Boulevard. The address is 10850 West Pico Boulevard, LA 90064. There's one in Pasadena at Pasadena City College Community Education Center. That's 3035 East Foothill Boulevard, Pasadena 91107. And the final one is in Altadena. It's the Altadena Disaster Recovery Center at 540 West Woodbury Road, Altadena 91001. So again, Mark, thank you so much for sharing everything. I will keep you updated on the feedback that we get and any additional questions that we get. But like we said, we're in this for the long term. This isn't a, pat someone on the head, give them a check for $750, and 2 weeks later everything's fine.
Yeah.
This is a completely uncharted territory for all of us. So
And if coming down to help with your neighborhood, I'd be glad to do that. MarkNeveau.org is a website too. If they have questions, I'm not here drumming business up, but if I can help them with information, I'd be more than glad to do that.
Yeah, spell that out for them, please.
Sure, it's MarkNeveau.org, M-A-R-K, Neveau, N-E-V-E-A-U.
Perfect. Oh, thank you, Mark, so much. We'll definitely be in touch soon.
Sounds great, Christy. Thank you for doing this.
Well, that's it. Another episode of What Nobody Tells Us. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you felt something. I hope you learned something. And I hope you feel empowered to go reach out to somebody who might be going through something you don't understand. Lean in, ask the questions, make the connection, be the friend who starts the conversation. I can't tell you how much it will mean to someone. If you have ideas for further topics, please reach out to me. I love hearing from you. Your emails and your tweets and your texts and your Instagram DMs are so welcome and so amazing. If you want to hear more, every episode is available on my website, ChristyBishop.com. That's Christiebishop.com. You can find all previous episodes, and you can also book me for speaking engagements, for training, coaching, and marketing consulting. I've only been doing that for the last 20 plus years. It's one of my first loves. So again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Christy Bishop, and this is What Nobody Tells Us.